Hello, hello, hello. Welcome back to Two Nates on Sports. My name is Nathan Simmons, and with me, as always, is Nathan Kwan. We have a lot to discuss, basically the opening weekend for college football, and specifically, we have a lot to talk about, or maybe not so much when it comes to Texas. Old Texas meet New Texas, same as the old Texas. What say you, Kwan?
Yeah, the Tom Herman revelation that a lot of us were hoping for didn't really materialize today in a game that Texas came in a 17-point favorite. Granted, Maryland is a Power 5 school and they play in the Big Ten, but I mean, this is not a top-tier Big Ten team, and they weren't coming off a good year. They weren't expected to do much this year, but the Longhorns certainly made them look like they were a really good team today. Just initial thoughts from watching most of the game. The defense has major problems. Looking at the box score, they gave up 263 yards rushing on the ground, which is absolutely absurd if you think about it. They gave up 6.1 yards per carry and 4 rushing touchdowns. Just overall, the defense in general, too many big plays. It just seemed like every time the offense would put up together a good drive, and then the defense even got Maryland into some third and long situations. They just couldn't get off the field and they couldn't prevent the big play, and that continually hurt them time and time again. And then secondly, offensively, for me, the offensive line just was not good enough. Both halves, we talked a lot about the last couple of years, the youth of the team with the freshmen and sophomores that they were playing, but the offensive line is filled with juniors and seniors, and just the amount of mistakes that they were making, leaving unblocked pass rushers, not giving running lanes for the running backs to move into the secondary, and just communication wise, it was just a mess up front. And there are instances throughout that game that Shane Buechele was running for his life, and he really had to make something out of nothing because the line gave him no protection at all. What are your thoughts of the game?
Bad, not good. Just really disappointed, I would say. I mean, granted, I didn't really think that Texas should have been ranked top 25 in the nation, but I mean, even still, I mean, as much as you have to give credit towards Maryland, I mean, you can't. I mean, you can't dismiss this team. I mean, clearly, but I mean, even still, giving up 51 points to Maryland, come on. No, I mean, especially in the first game for basically the first era of your new coach, you don't want to give this terrible an effort. And it started off okay. The Texas had a pick 6 at the very beginning, and it seemed like, oh, okay, this is the Texas we should be expecting. And then just after that, just kept going downhill. And I would say the big thing that really, even though I wouldn't say it was a turning point because Texas did get back within 3 points, I think the thing that really put them behind the 8 ball was just how bad the kicking was. And I would say the sequence that really turned this game around was basically on 3rd and 7 or something like that. Shane Buechele passed for a first down all the way up to the Maryland 6, but then it got called back due to offensive pass interference. And then the next play, which was basically 3rd and 22, all the way back to the Maryland 27, Shane Buechele passes it to Johnson, and Johnson can't hold on to the ball, and so they decide to go for a field goal. And then, because we can't seem to find a decent kicker, he kicks it too low, it gets blocked, and then gets picked up and scooped up, and Maryland scores a touchdown. And so you go from possibly at least whittling down the score from 14-7 to 14-10 to being down 14 points. And granted, Texas was able to return the favor and get a blocked kick return for the touchdown, which again, I mean, at least is nice to see, but at the end of the day, like I said before, they came in within 3 points of Maryland. But even before that point, this team just didn't seem to have a lot of confidence in being able to be the winner of this game. And I think this just for the past 5 years, 5 to 6 years, really, since the twilight of Mac Brown's coaching tenure, pretty much all the way through Charlie Strong's coaching tenure up until now, this is a program that confidence in itself and can't really seem to string anything together, and really it can't seem to assert itself at this point. I feel like they still go into every game thinking that they're going to lose when they should just really be thinking about how they're going to win. And it dismiss Tom Herman just after his first game, but he's got a lot of work to do at this point in order to turn around this program. And at the end of the day, too, Texas can't keep saying oh, the problem is the coach, the problem is the coach. They're already still paying Charlie Strong because they fired him. They're already still paying Mac Brown because they're firing him. They can't be paying a third coach not to coach again. So they're pretty much stuck with Tom Herman, and so they have to hope it around. And granted, I will give them this, that Texas was able to, again, coming within striking distance, but just again, like they still lost by 10 points. They still gave up 51 points. Yeah, they were able to score 41 points, but you could argue that by that point it was just mostly like they were able to score a touchdown with less than 2 minutes left in the game. So like just as easily been 17-point win for Maryland, which would have been the exact opposite of what was predicted by bettors and whatnot. This is just not a good game. Not to me, this is not a good team.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much you can project for the year. I mean, it was the first game, but you said you got to give credit a little bit to Maryland and especially Ty Johnson. He had a lot of kickoff return yardage, but also his he had 12 carries for 132 yards and a touchdown. He led the nation in yards per carry last year, and all his talents are on display today. And also quarterback Tyrell Pigrome, he looked very poised out there and shredded apart a very woeful Texas secondary this afternoon. But yeah, the special teams, I do not understand how bad that aspect of the team has been the last couple of years. The kicking especially, this team hasn't had a good kicker since the Colt McCoy days when Justin Tucker was on the team. And I mean, obviously he's an all-pro of the Baltimore Ravens now, but Josh Rowland, the junior college transfer today, you mentioned he missed the field goal early on, got another one blocked that was returned for a touchdown. And then eventually they ended up just going for it on fourth down repeatedly and just not trusting that aspect of the game. And I mean, that's going to have to be fixed. I mean, special teams, you take it for granted, but that is so important to field position and getting points on the board. The coverage teams weren't good. The punter, I thought, was actually pretty good today. And then the coverage team just couldn't make tackles in the open field. And it was just bad all around. I mean, I will give them credit. They did fight back. I mean, when it was 27-7, which is an absurd score, 1.5 quarters in, but the team did fight back a little bit. They fumbled the initial kickoff off the 27-7, but then the defense got a 3-and-out, and then they blocked the field goal and got the touchdown. They also had a punt return touchdown. And also Shane Buechele, I think he had an early interception, but I think he had a pretty solid game given the guys around him not really doing too much, especially on the offensive line. I think the running backs didn't benefit from the poor offensive line play as well, but good, solid game by the receiving crew as well. So I think there are positives there. I mean, obviously next week they're going to have a cupcake with San Jose State coming in here, so that should be a win. But
I mean, you'd hope.
Yeah, I mean, nothing's guaranteed, but I think it's a lot. Some of it is mindset, like you said, belief, but also I think a lot of it's just execution, right? Like in the end, it's not that you don't believe you can win. It's just, are you able to do the things necessary to put you in the best position to win? And just the amount of penalties, the mental mistakes, missed tackles, those are all things in execution, and you have to clean those up if you want to win.
Yeah, I know. And going back to the punter, like, I mean, I forget his name, but he's like a perennial like Ray Guy finalist. So I mean, he's outside of Texas, he's also considered one of the best punters in the league, and that's nice. But I mean, at this point, when people consider your punter to be the best part of your team, like you have a problem. And so you just got to hope for the best and just hope that like they can pull it together. And especially since like they still have some like Connor Williams and Malik Jefferson. These people are players that have a chance to go in the first round this year if they can turn it around and put in a great performance for the rest of the season. But the way things are looking, it's not looking very possible, especially with the way that Malik Jefferson is supposed to be the leader of the defense. And like the fact that they gave up 51 points does not speak well to his leadership abilities then.
Yeah, he was not the best today, and I mean nobody on the defense was really any good, especially the defensive line. They got no pressure whatsoever on Tyrell Pigrome, and then the running lanes that were opened up by the Maryland offensive line. It was just wide open gaps. I mean, I could have probably run through some of those gaps. They were so huge, and the tackling was pretty bad as well. So, yeah, I mean, there's nobody on the defense that played well.
For sure, but let's move on now. We've done enough trashing of Texas. Let's at least talk about a few other games, or at least one other game, which is the big showdown between the number one overall versus number 3 overall, Alabama versus Florida State. Do you have an update on that?
Yeah, I mean, we're recording this on 9:27 p.m. on Saturday night, and It looks like it's a pretty good game. So by the time you listen to this, go check out the highlights if you didn't see the Bama Florida State game. But it looks pretty well played on both sides. Defense for both sides is the strengths of their teams. So, and you also have veteran quarterbacks in DeAndre Francois and Jalen Hurts. But yeah, no major upsets today in college football. And the winner of this game should be the number one team going into next.
Not only just next week, but probably for at least the next 6 weeks, assuming they don't lose the rest of their games going from here on out. But
yeah, you could say they'd be the national title favorite, I guess, going into the rest of the season.
Oh, without question. Yeah. I mean, again, like obviously don't count your chickens before they hatch, but I mean, either of these two teams losing any of their matchups for the rest of the season, honestly, depending on obviously how well a few of the other teams end up being in each other's respective conferences. And again, any given Saturday, but these were rightfully ranked number 1 and number 3 teams.
Yeah, and I'd say it's refreshing to see ranked matchups, especially between 2 top 3 teams in the first week of the season. We're so accustomed to seeing cupcake matchups in the first couple of weeks of the year, so it's good to see teams actually testing themselves.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like for me though, I remember when Texas back in 2009, like because of the Red River rivalry always being like so early on, that by beating Oklahoma, they were ranked really high. But when they lost to Texas Tech, they ended up dropping below Oklahoma. And because of that, Oklahoma was able to go to the national championship, and Texas had to settle for the Fiesta Bowl, despite the fact that Texas did beat Oklahoma at the time. So, but I mean, at the same time, it's still very refreshing and very entertaining, like you said. There's something special too, in so much that like you save it up towards the end, as well as the fact that it does end up helping your rankings once it becomes time for bowl games.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the strategy has always been just if you're going to lose one game, you lose it early, and then you work your way back up the standings when everybody else ahead of you eventually loses.
Exactly. Yeah. On to some baseball talk. Obviously, there's been a lot of controversy this past week between the two Texas teams, but at the same time, overlook the human tragedy of it all. Our hearts go out to the at least 30 people that passed due to Hurricane Harvey. It's easy for us to get caught up in the controversies of it all, but we can't lose sight of the fact that a lot of people's lives have been ended, ruined, or now they have to just start like picking up the pieces again. And it's just going to be a very tough time for a lot of people there. And, again, my condolences to those families, as well as just my heart goes out to people trying to pieces of their lives and put it back together. So.
Yeah, I born and raised in Houston. It's been a really tough week, and just seeing the pictures on the news. I went up to Dallas last weekend, and it was just going to be for a weekend, and I was going to drive back on Sunday afternoon. But seeing the pictures and the roads are completely flooded, I've been stuck here this whole week. And sports is great that we can get behind our teams, and it's something that a lot of people can share a passion, and it teaches a lot of kids about teamwork, and it's really a great avenue. But when you have a devastation like what has happened the past week, it's really secondary, and it's really tough to go back and talk about sports when there's so many bigger things going on in the world. But it's good that the Astros have come back, and I think it will help with the healing process. And I mean, we'll mention it later on in the shoutouts, but just the support from around the nation, as well as a lot of the athletes, not only in the Houston and Texas area, but also just around the leagues, have just shown there's tremendous amount of support. And it's going to be a decade-long probably recovery and rebuilding process. You just look at the expanse of damage that has occurred, just the Houston area in general, wherever you are, West Houston, Southwest Houston, Southeast, and even outside of Houston, the Beaumont area, Rockport.
For sure. Yeah. I mean, this is, one of the most devastating hurricanes to hit America since, I'd say, definitely Sandy.
Ever.
Yeah.
I mean, they were saying that
most amount of like rainfall for sure.
Yeah, I mean, they were saying that the amount of damage would be more than Katrina and Sandy combined. And so that just shows you the extent of what has happened. Yeah, I mean, let's talk about the Astros. You mentioned the controversy, and I'll just mention it briefly. I was a little bit more fired up about it in midweek, but basically I still believe that the Texas Rangers should have been more accommodating for the Astros to move the series. Basically, the two teams were supposed to play a series down in Houston this past week, but obviously because of the hurricane, they had to move it. And so the Astros wanted to swap series with the Rangers. They had another scheduled series between the two teams later on this year in Arlington. And logically, it would have made sense to flip this week's series to Arlington and then have the later series on in Houston. But the Rangers were not willing to do that because they felt like there wasn't enough time to let their season ticket holders know about the switch, as well as they didn't want to have a 12-game road trip at the end of the year. And I still believe in the face of everything that went on, and I mean, the Astros are human too. They're players that have families and kids down in the area, and to not be accommodating to that fact and to put your own interests, I don't agree with that. But in the end, it's just sports and it's not that big a deal. And they went down to Tampa and they played their series there and we move on. But what did you think from a Rangers perspective?
From a Rangers perspective, again, I'm just going to stay neutral on this. At the same time, too, I believe the story coming out from the Rangers camp is that they, like, how about we just have both series, both be in Arlington, but one be the home for the Astros, and then just have most of the proceeds go to the disaster relief, as well as just, being as accommodating as possible. But that being said, I do understand why the Astros did not want to do that either, just because, again, that would have been essentially an extra home series for the Rangers in spite of everything. And so what ended up happening is just MLB decided, you know what, let's just do a neutral site. That way no one gets home field advantage, which, I mean, I really wish MLB had a better backup plan going forward, because at the end of the day too, like this, they knew about the possible damage and the fact that the series could very well not be able to be played this past week in Houston. And so you'd like to see MLB be a bit more proactive on that front, but nonetheless, unfortunately, that this was sort of what the decision came down to. At the end of the day, too, I think it's in the face of everything, maybe be able to do that, and then maybe switching the series might not have been the worst thing in the world, and then maybe Texas gets extra compensation in some way for doing it down in the future. I mean, again, I just don't know all the information going around with it, so I don't know what was talked about. But at the end of the day, too, like you said, it's just sports. And at the end of the day, it's just more important to make sure that we focus on trying to help with the recovery and help with the people that have been displaced. But let's talk about the other big news about the Houston Astros is that they finally decided, while they still had time, to go get a stud for their rotation.
Yeah, so barely in the nick of time, basically 11th hour, 58th minute, the trade finally got finalized as they get Justin Verlander from the Detroit Tigers for 3 pretty good prospects. Franklin Perez is the number 3 or number 2 prospect in the organization. He is projects as probably a top line starter down the line. He's the number 32 prospect on Baseball America's top 100 list this past year. Das Cameron was a really highly regarded pick. He was the number 9 overall prospect in the organization. And then Jake Rogers, number 11 overall prospect. So quite a steep price to pay. But I think given the team's play in August and the way they've struggled down the stretch here, I think absolutely necessary. And I was happy to hear the trade. A lot of fans were definitely happy to hear the trade. And this just shows that they're going for it now. And the frontline starting pitching that they wanted at the trade deadline, they finally got. And now they're pretty stacked at starting pitcher. Their top 3 guys, you would think in some order, would be Dallas Keuchel, Justin Verlander, and Lance McCullers when he comes back from injury. After that, they kind of have a quandary who would be their 4th starter. And then after that, who's going to make the playoff roster? Because typically in postseason play, you only have 4 starting pitchers. And then you usually only have 6 or 7 relievers after that. And then you maximize your flexibility with position players and pinch runners and extra catchers and stuff like that. So I think they really have a decision to make in the upcoming month who those guys are, because I think definitely Mike Fiers is going to be out of the rotation. He's had one good month where he carried the pitching staff, but he's been terrible since then. And then Colin McHugh has been pretty solid since coming off the disabled list. Charlie Morton's been pretty solid this year. Brad Peacock has been more than solid. So those 3 guys, 2 of them are going to be relegated to the bullpen. And then in the bullpen, they're getting Will Harris back. Ken Giles is a closer. Chris Davinsky was an all-star. Joe Musgrove has developed into a late inning shutdown reliever. And then after that, you have a bunch of guys. Francisco Liriano, is he going to make it just because he's a lefty? Luke Gregerson's been really up and down, more down than up And then Francis Marquez has shown flashes, but he's been really inconsistent. And then you have Tyler Clippard, who you got from the White Sox. So it's a lot of names I just listed off, and you're going to have to end up cutting a lot of people from your playoff roster. But I think it's a good problem to have.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like being able to add someone like Justin Verlander, like, yes, he's not the same Justin Verlander who won the AL MVP and AL Cy Young Award back in 2011, but he's still one of the best pitchers in the league. Maybe not as high up, like I would say maybe like top 20 or so, top 20, top 30. He's someone that came off a year last year where he arguably should have won the Cy Young Award. And now he's an Astro, and not only that, he doesn't have the pressure of being the ace of the staff because you already have a Cy Young winner on there with Dallas Keuchel. So you have a strong 1-2 punch with McCullers and McHugh coming back. I mean, yes, like they haven't exactly been super consistent, unfortunately, whether due to just like general ineffectiveness or just injury. But help bolster this team going into the playoffs. And not only that, they also added Cameron Maybin, a former top prospect who ended up actually being traded for Miguel Cabrera back in the day. While he hasn't exactly lived up to those expectations, he is a decent role player and someone that you can put on your team as a fourth outfielder who can decently field in the outfield, but also can give you a little bit of punch off the bench. So that's a pretty good sign to see that the Astros are finally sort of taking it seriously, that they need to really improve and start like adding some more firepower for a potential deep playoff run. So that's nice to see.
Yeah, and you could see immediately the team got a boost coming off that news. They won today in their return to Houston, 12-8 over the Mets. But after the trade deadline, we talked about it. Dallas Keuchel came out with comments that he was disappointment's understatement. Josh Reddick said the team was down in the dumps. And this move, I mean, it does more than just elevate your pitching staff. It elevates your team morale. And I mean, back to Verlander, what he also brings is just playoff experience. I mean, he's been there, done that. And the Astros, a lot of their pitchers haven't. Their playoff experience collectively has just been that one series in 2015 against the Royals where they took them to 5 games, but that's been about it. Justin Verlander is a veteran. When he walks into that locker room, players are going to look to him. And I mean, similar to Chris Paul, he lives and breathes winning, and he expects a lot out of his teammates. And I think that's going to prove invaluable down the stretch as the Astros go into the playoffs. But yeah, you talked about Maybin as well. He leads the American League in steals this year. So in addition to being an additional outfielder with Derek Fisher struggling, he also brings that instant speed off the bench where you could pinch run him for a Brian McCann or a Carlos Beltran late in the game and instantly add another threat on the base paths to Jose Altuve.
Yeah, for sure. And yeah, I mean, we should talk a little bit about the past week. I mean, I know obviously this has been a tough time for the Astros in terms of, off the field. On the field, they were able to win 2 out of 3 games in Anaheim. And then the series we talked about between the Rangers and the Astros being moved to St. Petersburg, the Astros ended up winning only 1 of the 3 games that they played against the Rangers, winning the last one of that series.
Yeah, and the team, as we mentioned, struggled through August. They were 11-16, and their lead on the American League home field advantage has dropped down to 3.5 games. But yeah, the pitching has been pretty poor. The offense has been pretty poor. They really need Carlos Correa to come back and contribute. And there are signs that he's going to come back this weekend on Sunday, potentially against the Mets, or if not, the next series on the road against Seattle. So that return will definitely be needed because the middle of the lineup has just completely collapsed. Mark Gonzalez is in a big slump. Josh Reddick's in a slump. Yuli Gurriel's in a slump. Altuve's in a relative slump for Jose Altuve's standards. The only guy really hitting in the lineup right now is Alex Bregman, and he's become a revelation at the top of the lineup for the team. But hopefully we get Correa back, and he has 3 weeks to get his form back in ahead of the playoffs. This weekend, they're playing the New York Mets, and then next week, they start a 10-game road trip in Seattle and then in Oakland. But how are those Rangers doing?
Very much like Mr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. They go from getting swept by the Oakland A's to winning the series against, granted, a team in the Houston Astros that were not exactly fully focused due to very understandable reasons, to then winning the first game of the series against Los Angeles Angels. Like right now, they're tied going into the bottom of the 9th. This is a game that's also being played in Texas right now. So we shall see how that goes. Like right now it's tied and they have a good shot of winning this game. It's just obviously they have to be
You
able
got
to
to win the
score.
series. The Angels are ahead of you in the standings.
Yeah, I know. I mean, also, it's just like this team is just like for whatever reason, they seem to at least be able to better than expected after the trade deadline and after trading away one of their best players. And I mean, I know we've been talking about this, harping about this so many times, but it's just like this team is just a perennial 50-50 team at this point. And so it's just a little bit frustrating. But nonetheless, I really do like the signs going forward, especially from the bullpen. Like Perez has been real solid this past week. Like I remember his last outing, he only gave up 2 runs over 7 innings pitched. Cashner also was phenomenal in his last outing. He only gave up 1 earned run over 8 innings pitched with 6 strikeouts. I mean, the offense, especially during the Houston Astros series, was very hot, except for the last game. But they scored 8 runs and 12 runs in the first 2 games, and so they've been pretty good. Unfortunately, right now it looks like Beltre is going to miss 4 weeks. So, I mean, hopefully this team is able to be able to hold solid until then. I mean, we already saw what happened when this team did not have Adrian Beltre in the lineup, and it was very inconsistent. And so when they had Beltre back, this offense was on fire. But now that he's going to be gone again, it's just like hopefully someone's able to step up in his place. At least someone that might be able to is Chirinos, who's been hitting really hot, and he has a .457 OBP in August. Andrews was able to not only has a career high in RBIs, but has already batting average above .300. So that's been nice. Gallo hit his 37th home run on Friday, and so it looks like he's going to be able to get over 40 home runs for the season. Hopefully, so long as he's able to stay healthy. Granted, he missed a lot of August due to concussion, but now he's back, and hopefully he's able to stay in for the stretch. Odor is unfortunately struggling again. He's gone 3 for 37 over the road trip, 4 for his last 42. I mean, it's just like. I don't know at what point how they're going to be able to fix him. I mean, they've signed him long term, and it's just like to see someone that has so much potential and is just not able to deliver or really fix or adjust it. I mean, we'll see what happens. I mean, hopefully this thing gets fixed, but not really going to be able to hold my breath until then. And interesting news is that the Rangers themselves decided to go out and make a trade, and they were able to get Miguel Gonzalez for a former first-round pick, Tijuan Forbes. Gonzalez really does just. I mean, again, this is someone that's going to be more of a bottom of the rotation guy. He's projected to be the number 4 starter going forward. Which, I mean, granted, considering how much trouble this rotation has been, especially towards the bottom of it, being able to get someone that could solidly put up decent numbers as your number 4 starter, being able to get that day in, day out instead of the rotation that you had before between Griffin, Martinez, Ross, and Austin Biebens, Dirks. Getting someone that can just step in, and so you don't have to. You keep using those 4 people constantly is going to be. Granted, he's going to be a free agent next year, but he's a bottom of the rotation pitcher, so he should be like if they really want to re-sign him, they could. The first September call-ups for the Rangers have been Middlebrooks, who provides a right-handed bat off the bench. Catcher AJ Jimenez, just to help with the depth at catcher. Right-handed pitcher Paolo Espino, and left-handed pitcher Jake Diekman, who finally has come back from injury. Right now, they're going to be focusing on trying to finish up against the Los Angeles Angels, and then they have a series in New York against the New York Yankees. So that should be really interesting to see.
Yeah, and just briefly mention other waiver deadline deals. The Angels were really active. They got Justin Upton from the Tigers, another blockbuster trade. So this was a really active waiver trade period, one of the most active we've ever seen. Very interesting to see so many guys with big contracts changing teams.
No, I mean, I did not realize that they did that. Like, that's just shocking. And it's also shocking to see the Detroit Tigers, who at first we were all saying like we're kind of losers for not selling off at the deadline, finally just like really take advantage of the fact that of the waiver deadline and still get a fairly decent return. I mean, like the return for Justin Verlander was arguably more than what the Rangers got for Yu Darvish. But I mean, granted, Yu Darvish was not signed for as long a term as Justin Verlander. But I mean, even still, like being able to trade off Justin Upton and Justin Verlander at the trade deadline, as well as also for the Angels themselves, they were able to get Brandon Phillips, who, I mean, yeah, granted, he's not as comparable as like in terms of impact when compared to someone like Justin Upton or Justin Verlander. And granted, like he's been far removed from the time that he was an all-star, but Brandon Phillips is still a pretty good player, all things considered, and especially as a player that you get at the waiver deadline. Like that's a good pickup. So yeah, the Angels did a good job. I mean, it's just now a matter of whether or not they were able to do enough to procure a spot on the second wild card. I mean, they're right now going into the 10th inning in Arlington. This game is still tied. We'll see how things hold up. Leclerc is now pitching to Mike Trout, so I'm not going to hold my breath. And yeah, that's how baseball goes sometimes. But
yeah, I mean the Angels, they have really been a story this year. They lost Mike Trout for 6 weeks, and then their offense actually picked up, and then they have had so many injuries in their starting rotation. It's kind of similar to the Astros, and they're sitting there 2 games out of the wild card, and then they add Upton and Phillips at the waiver deadline. So this is a huge series in Arlington this weekend. I would say they have the experience to catch the Twins. Minnesota's just been playing so well lately, and I think they have like the easiest schedule going down the stretch. So it's going to be tough to catch them, but I think the Angels are really going for it at this point, and they have a real shot.
Yep. Yeah, that I agree with you on that. Let's move on then to the NFL.
Yes. So last week we recorded before the third preseason game, but Texans looked pretty bad in New Orleans. They lost 13-0. The offense was not good. The good news was Tom Savage was still pretty solid, 10 for 16, 79 yards, didn't turn the ball over. Deshaun Watson, on the other hand, had a second straight bad preseason game. He threw an interception. The Saints also dropped 2 more, so he could have had 3 picks on the night. The defense looked pretty okay. Kareem Jackson was a standout tackling. Receiver battle, I mean, we'll talk about the cuts in a bit, but Bruce Ellington continued his strong preseason, had 4 catches for 29 yards. The problem continues to be the offensive line. Dwayne Brown, left tackle, all-pro, still holding out. There's no word on whether or not he will report ahead of week 1. The fill-in guys, without them, it's just been looked pretty bad. They've only opened up running room for 57 yards rushing on 21 carries. They allowed 4 sacks and 9 quarterback hits and only 13 first downs throughout that game. And you don't usually see a shutout in a preseason game. And the offensive line that's going to be the undoing, I think, of this team if Dwayne Brown doesn't report soon. 4th preseason game obviously was canceled, and I think rightfully so, between the Texans and the Cowboys. Kind of a meaningless game, and the Texans players wanted to get back to their families. But the cuts came down today, actually, and kind of some surprising ones. So the Texans have carried 3 quarterbacks on their roster the last couple of years, but they aren't going to do that this year. So they cut Brandon Weeden. Also Nick Novak, who been really good the last 2 years, and he scored a lot of points last year with that offense that would stall in the red zone. But the Texans ended up cutting him, and they're going to go with Kaimi Fairbairn. He was a undrafted rookie in 2016, and then he got on the IR last year, but they like his stronger leg, and so they're going to go with Fairbairn at the kicking spot. And then also David Questenberry talked about his fight coming off non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but he unfortunately got cut as well. Dylan Cole and D. Virgin, who are undrafted rookies, also made the roster, so congratulations to them. And then wide receiver-wise, Bruce Ellington made the team, so his strong preseason led to a roster spot. Yeah, also this past week, extensions given out by Rick Smith to DeAndre Hopkins, a max deal. I think he's going to be the highest paid wide receiver in the league, and so that's a lot of trust in a guy who's not had the best production, but obviously a lot of that due to the poor quarterback play the last couple of years. They also extended CJ Fedorowicz multiple years, which is kind of strange to me. I mean, he's been okay as a tight end, but I don't really see the warrant of a long-term extension for him. And then Jay Prosh got an extension as well, a fullback, and safety Andre Howe got one as well. So while Dwayne Brown sits and is holding out and wants that guaranteed long-term money, the Texans instead choose to extend some other players. So I don't know what message that sends, but it's bad with Dwayne Brown. And it's going to be up to him whether or not he wants to sacrifice $500,000 every week. He doesn't report, but at this point, there's no signs that show he's going to be ready for the season in week 1. So Texans are just going to have to play without him, and I don't think that's going to end up going well. How about the Cowboys?
I mean, they're doing okay. They had a game against the Raiders, but I'd say probably the biggest thing that stood out was Anthony Hitchens' injury, unfortunately. So he got banged up pretty badly on his knee, and he needed to be helped off the field. Now it's looking like he's going to miss 8 weeks, which is not great. There's always going to be that consistency with the fact that a Cowboys defensive player is either going to miss time due to injury or just something else that's really dumb. And especially with the fact that the linebacking core is definitely seeming like an injury-prone part of the team. I mean, you obviously have Sean Lee, who up until last season had been unable to play every game. And this time around, he's a little bit banged up during preseason, which is why he's been taking it a little bit easier, especially with the fact that he's also like 30. So he's not exactly going to be pushing it all that hard in preseason. But then obviously you have Jalen Smith, who's trying to return back from basically a torn nerve. And he's someone that's probably not going to be able to play starters minutes right off the bat, especially after missing an entire year due to his injury. So it's going to be interesting to see what they do going forward. I would say like Dak's performance in this game wasn't as good as it was in against the Colts, but I mean, again, it's still preseason, and then on top of it, he wasn't bad. He just wasn't able to lead the team downfield as efficiently and consistently as he was against the Colts. But nonetheless, it's getting time to get ready. Outside of that, you have the Governor's Cup, unfortunately, had to be canceled due to Hurricane Harvey. Instead, a telethon done in its place with a bunch of Cowboys players running point on that, and that was really nice to see. And then in terms of Zeke news, the NFLPA requests an order to block the Zeke ban. So it's looking like the Players Association wants to get involved, and they want to get involved on the side of Zeke. A lot of nasty stuff has been coming out regarding information that was given during the investigation. Not only were both like doing a lot of drugs. I mean, you know, it's college, but obviously I don't do drugs, kids. That's a bad thing to do. Go play stickball. But on top of that too, there's been some talk that it's getting messier. Let's just put it that way. It's getting a lot messier. You just hope that like justice prevails on that. It's not looking good for everyone involved.
It's not good for the NFL, right?
Like that's sort of a given, yeah. But go ahead.
Yeah, there's reports coming out that the person in the NFL that interviewed the witness, they came back with a recommendation not to suspend Ezekiel Elliott. And then if the person that you sent to investigate tells you not to suspend him, then why are you suspending him? Then what is the purpose of the process if you're just gonna? Yeah, it's just not good. Not a good look for the NFL.
Yeah, let's move on now to the NBA.
Yeah, so the NBA news this week, not much, but the Kyrie Irving, Isaiah Thomas trade finally got completed. The Cavaliers somehow got Boston to send another second-round pick to the Cavs. So I already talked about, I thought that Cleveland had already fleeced Boston, and the fact that they were able to get another pick in that trade is absolutely great job by Cleveland's management, I guess. And Boston, I guess, really wants Kyrie, and they really didn't value that extra second-round pick.
Yeah, it just kept adding up, and it was just sort of like, wow. You're willing to give up all that just for one player. But I mean, again, I talked with a friend of mine that's a Boston Celtics fan earlier today, and he talked about how like, and he was someone that was kind of low on Isaiah Thomas. I mean, he loved Isaiah Thomas, but like he was still someone that was just like kind of recognized what situation they were in terms of like going from Kyrie to Isaiah Thomas, which at this point, like you kind of have to view it with, I mean, as much as I like Jay Crowder and like, you know, respect to him, I know he's going through a tough time right now, but I mean, at this point you have to really compare like, okay, like whether or not like this really fits them and is kind of an improvement over Isaiah. I mean, you just look at A, the age difference, and then B, also like the fact that like Isaiah Thomas might actually be out for a great deal of time for the season. So, I mean, it just makes sense for the Cavs who just like definitely want to build towards the future, but also still want to compete present, like getting at least like an extra second round pick for the trouble is definitely worth it. And they were able to get good value out of this, and they also did a good job of not over negotiating and over bargaining, because like you can definitely, when I first heard that there was some pushback against it, I was thinking like, oh, this deal might fall through. But to me, like, I mean, what I expected was exactly what the Cavs got, which is that extra second round pick. They didn't overplay their hand, and they didn't push away the Celtics too much. So that was good to see, at least from the Cavs point of view. Going forward, also, like in terms of interesting news for Texas teams, the Mavs finally negotiated something with Nerlens Noel. He's going to be returning back, but only at the most basic qualifying offer. He's only getting 4.1 million, I think, for just one season this year. And so it looks like Nerlens Noel is trying to bet on himself and hope that he can get that max contract next season, and especially without the threat of restricted free agency and having teams be sort of scared away from that and not being able to be able to get him away from the Mavs. Now, that being said, if everything goes according to plan, I can definitely see Noel getting the max from the Mavericks. I mean, obviously, it's going to depend on whether or not this team is any good, and especially also like if this team ends up doing like not all that well, and especially if they end up getting a top pick, they might just go with one of the top prospects that they have at center this year. But nonetheless, that's kind of counting the chickens before they hatch. I'm just happy to see Noel be back on this team. I mean, he was someone that, like, whenever he was on the floor playing for the Mavs, they were definitely a better team. It's just like, again, he's someone that does struggle with injury, and it's just like he hasn't been as consistent just because of the situation that was in Philadelphia, where he was competing for time at the same position among players that were just as young as he was. So it was not a great situation for his development. Being able to play under Rick Carlisle, who's been a real sort of like whisperer for big men, like he's got a good shot of really earning that max contract, and I really do hope he does.
All right, let's move on to soccer talk. The U.S. men's national team is now 70% through with their World Cup qualifying in the hexagonal round. They played on Friday night in Harrison, New Jersey, a home game against Costa Rica, and they lost 2-0. The 2 goals coming from Marco Arena, who plays for MLS's San Jose Earthquakes, but just not a good night. The back line was not good. Tim Ream and Jeff Cameron were the 2 culprits on the 2 goals, and Tim Howard also had a bad game. Both those goals he normally stops. So also, just for the U.S. men's national team, choosing Harrison, New Jersey as a venue, they have a lot of Costa Rican support there. And so with such an important match in the World Cup qualifying, to pick that venue is a strange decision, because it turned out to be more of a kind of a neutral site, because seemed like an equal number of U.S. and Costa Rica fans. But right now they're third in the Hex with 3 matches to go. The top 3 in the region automatically qualify for Russia, and then the 4th place team has to play a playoff against the team from the Asian region. But they're tied with Honduras at 8 points. Panama's also 1 point back at 7 points, and so this upcoming Tuesday they play at Honduras, an absolutely huge match. The U.S. has to get a result in that one, or else their World Cup qualifying hopes are really in danger. If they lose that one, Honduras would jump ahead of them, and then they don't have 2 matches left, and those would pretty much have to be must wins for the team to make it to Russia. As far as club level, MLS, the Dynamo were off last week due to Hurricane Harvey. They're going to be off until next week, but they had 5 players call up to the World Cup qualifying. DeMarcus Beasley to the U.S., Adolfo Machado for Panama, and the trio of Albert Feliz, Boniek Garcia, and Romel Kyoto will be representing Honduras. FC Dallas, they continue their struggles. They lost last week 2-1 to Columbus, and then tonight actually they tied New York Red Bulls 2-2. They're sitting in 6th now in the West, right on the edge of the playoffs, and really need to turn it around soon, or else they're going to miss out on the playoffs this year. They had 5 players for the World Cup qualifying: Kellen Acosta and Matt Hedges for the U.S., Tesho Akindele for Canada, Maynard Figueroa for Honduras, and Carlos Gurezo for Ecuador. But let's move on to shoutouts. So first is to Tejas Prasad. He's actually in New York City for the U.S. Open. He's going to give us a full report next week and preview the men's final, but shout out to him. Also shout out to Rhys Hoskins of the Philadelphia Phillies. He hit 11 home runs in his first 18 Major League games, which is a all-time record. So shout out to him. actually saw him in San Francisco when he was playing against the Giants there. Also, shout out to Dustin Johnson. He beat Jordan Spieth in the playoff at the Northern Trust to win his first FedEx Cup event, and he now takes the lead in the standings. Shout out to the Lufkin Texas Little League World Series team. They are champions of the United States. Unfortunately, they lost to Japan in the championship match, but still what a run, and shout out to Lufkin, Texas. Finally, shout out just to all the support from the athletes that have contributed to the disaster relief efforts in the Houston area. Just to name a few, J.J. Watt, his influence on the city and just getting support around the country to get money in for that relief. He's now raised over $18 million in that charity. Also, Les Alexander, owner of the Rockets, owner of the Astros, Jim Crane, various owners around the NFL, Major League Baseball and the NBA, Dikembe Mutombo, former Houston Rockets player, James Harden, and then Dallas area athletes, Ezekiel Elliott, Des Bryant, the Cowboys cheerleaders, Orlando Scandrick, and then that Cowboys telethon we mentioned, they raised $2.3 million. So just that there's going to be a lot of more money and volunteers and help needed for the region, and good to see everyone just bonding together and helping rebuild the city. But I want you guys to visit our website, twoNatesOnSports.com. On the website this week, we have a link up to the J.J. Watt charity if you want to contribute. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel as well as iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, where you'll get a notification as soon as we release our new episodes. Our Facebook is also at Two Nates on Sports, so go like us there. And if you want to send any suggestions or comments, we also have an email address, twoNatesOnSports@gmail.com. Thank you guys for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.